Welcome to the very first episode of Mayday Mondays. I'm Zach Joyner, the webmaster of Spidey-Dude.com and the Grandmaster Puppet Master of the Spidey-Dude.com network. I am very happy to be a part of this first episode, but just like with Spectacular Radio, I'm not the host. I have a fantastic guy you've heard his voice before. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you the host of Mayday Mondays, Mr. Gerard Delatour II.
Yay! Clap, 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 clap.
Hang on.
You've heard my awkward and nasal voice previously on episodes of Clone Saga Chronicles.
Hang on.
And the aforementioned Spectacular Radio. And speaking of extra voices, the other guy joining us, the other voice that you hear over there is Jason.
Hello.
Now, you guys remember Jason, if you're a fan of Clone Saga Chronicles. He used to actually be on the show, and happy to have him back on here. Welcome back.
I'm glad to be back. It was a strange journey. It turns out, a clone took over my life, so I went off to live in Washington for a while, and then my aunt started dying, so I came back.
Well done.
Well done. Nicely done.
Jason will probably be my semi-regular co-host. I know that's a lot of hedges right there, but we'll see. The show is developing.
I hope.
But you'll be the primary co-host of this thing.
I hope so. Spider-Girl's one of my favorite series. It's a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah, and it'll probably
and gals and anyone else listening.
Yeah, it'll probably be like two to three co-hosts each episode.
Yeah, something like that. And we'll have a rotating setup here, and any listeners here who may in fact be interested, let us know. We'll share all of the ways to get in contact with us by the end of the episode.
Yeah, we definitely will do that.
Well, as good a place to start as any would be, I guess, where each of us began our stories of being Spider-Girl fans, because I can admit to my shame I did not start reading Spider-Girl until the Amazing Spider-Girl started, actually.
Really?
I didn't actually buy any of the first volume when it was new.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah, I know. I'm ashamed of that fact. It's not something I discovered until later, I suppose. But
I echo that similar sentiment myself. I actually collected the first about 4 or 5 issues, and then I was getting them at Hastings at the time, and they stopped carrying it. And once that happened, and I eventually found myself a regular comic shop, it was around issue 67. So I have like 4 or 5 issues of the first volume of the digests. But other than that, there's a big gap. There was a huge gap for me, which the digest was really good about filling in for. But I started regularly collecting around issue 67, Marked for Death storyline, and I collected the entire rest of the first volume, all of the second volume, and eventually the third volume.
I had to catch up on the first volume mainly through the digest, but unfortunately those only go up to issue 72. So, yeah. But yeah, by now I've gone back and read all of the Spider-Girl appearances, and I'm kicking myself that I wasn't able to get on board this earlier, because I certainly would have loved to have been there. It's one of those weird things, because comic shops had never really... They have a spotty history as far as keeping Spider-Girl in stock. Like, I know for a fact places I would go wouldn't have those issues sometimes.
Mine always had it. Or at least they had the main book. They were a little more spotty about... They didn't get, like, Spider-Girl the End until, I think, a week later, so I went to another store to get that. I should probably explain how I got into Spider-Girl.
Yes, you should. Go ahead.
Okay, so I first started collecting comics around, I think, I want to say 01 or 02. It was before the first Spider-Man movie came out. Anyway, I was getting into a bunch of Spider-Man stuff, and I won a half-off coupon for it from my local comic store, Comic City, from a contest after I named the most superheroes correctly. And one of the trades they had was the first Spider-Girl trade. Now, this is way out of print, and it's not one of the digests. It's like an actual trade paperback, and it collects issues 0 through 8 of Spider-Girl. And I devoured it. Thought it was a lot of fun. Next time I went to the store, there staring on the rack was Spider-Girl issue 54, which is the first issue of the 6-part Saga of the Serpent. And she's holding a giant gun, and she's got a Santa hat on. It says, ho, ho, ho. And I'm like, well, I've got to buy that because that cover's awesome. And I read the issue, and I was hooked immediately. And actually, I wrote a letter saying how much I love the issue, and it was printed like 2 or 3 issues later. I can never remember if it was published in issue 56 or 57. But I know you've also gotten a letter published, right, Zach? I think you had one published in Spider-Girl?
I actually had one printed in the first volume, I think, and one printed in the second volume.
Oh, okay. Show off.
Sorry,
I think I remember reading your letter in the second volume. I was like, Zach?
When we first started talking, you mentioned it, and I went back and looked it up. It's like, oh, hey, there it is, Zach Spidey Dude Joiner. But yeah, so...
Yeah, there's also some letters from Julio Barone, who we may or may not know, depending on whether or not he wants people to know that was him.
Yeah, that was him. I just outed him. Yeah, that was him.
Well, I mean, I know that was him, but I don't know that he's ever told anyone that was him. Should we just dispense with all the suspense and just...
Yeah, no, I think he's actually discussed that on Crawlspace.
Okay, yeah, it's Joshua Lapin Bertoni from Clone Saga Chronicles. Yeah. On the early internet days, I guess, like a lot of people, he wasn't going to use his real name on the internets. And so he just sort of he took up using the alias of Julio Barone for things.
It's funny, when I was reading the letters pages, and I started reading the letter, I'm like, huh, that looks a lot like my letter. Wait a second. I stopped reading, glanced down. Holy crap, that is my letter.
Yeah, they were, and we'll talk about this throughout probably the entire show. I know that there's plans to get maybe, hopefully, some of these guys on, but there was a huge, I mean, this title in the days of the internet was probably the most legitimately fought for book in organized online pep rallies that we've ever seen. Like you nowadays you hear people complain and bitch about stuff on the internet, and that's just the nature of the beast. But most of the time you get this, you're yelling into that Orwellian echo chamber. But with this book and the Spider-Girl message board on Elvira boards, that was a rallying point for this group of fans, and they took matters into their own hands.
I sent in letters on at least 3 separate occasions asking them not to cancel the book.
Oh man, I remember some of these cancellation things when they were going on.
Yeah.
And it was weird. I think that was around I started to first discover comics internet fandom at that point, where between this and books like the whole Fantastic Four thing that went on in the early 2000s, I believe, and that whole thing, like, that was when I really started to discover that, you know, there's a lot of comics fans on the internet. Maybe I should get on there.
Are you talking about the thing where Wade got taken off and then brought back?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just checking.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't quite know the story, the Cliff Notes version, Mark Waid was going to be fired from Fantastic Four because Bill Jemas wanted to go in a different direction with the series.
Like
and
he
really had
awful direction, but yeah, go.
Yeah, he had Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa writing on the side.
Bill
Jemas
in a bad direction? You don't say.
And they were working on that whole thing, and then, you know, Michael Ringo was going to quit to support Wade, and then it just blew up into a whole thing, and the fans got on board, and they're like, you can't do that, we actually really like this series, and eventually they just split off into 2 books, so Aguirre-Sacasa's plot ended up becoming, was it Marvel Knights 4?
Yes.
And then Wade and Ringo continued on into history, with what is, for my money, the second best run on Fantastic Four that we've ever gotten, but this is not the Fantastic Four podcast, so we should probably move on from that. Well, we should probably start with the character's origins. I don't mean the what-if issue, because we'll get to that. It's the whole point of this episode, but we should probably begin with that auspicious little story that everyone likes to call the Clone Saga.
Yes, the Clone Saga. Now, the Clone Saga is important to this story because of what happens in the Clone Saga. As, if you've been hearing on Clone Saga Chronicles, you know that we've been chronicling a little bit here and there the pregnancy of Mary Jane Watson. And
see, when a superhero and his girlfriend love each other very much, and that's the origin of Spider-Girl.
No, allow me to get into some more specifics there, Jason. We know how. I would assume that if people are listening to a podcast about a comic book character, they would know how babies are made by the storks. Anyway.
Yes, the radioactive spider stork. Well played, Mr. Joyner.
Anyway, after the stork came and visited the family of Peter Parker and Mary Jane, they came up with the name May to honor May Parker, who at this point in the Spider lore was actually dead. Mary Jane and Peter Parker are pregnant. Well, Mary Jane's pregnant. Peter Parker's just along for the ride. And they left New York for a while, came back, and were slowly building their lives together, moved into Aunt May's house, And this is massive spoilers for stuff that we haven't even gotten to yet in Clone Saga Chronicles. But anyway.
It's not spoilers. These stories are almost 20 years old.
Anyway, in Revelations, the final storyline of the Clone Saga, Mary Jane goes into labor. And upon going into labor, she is whisked away to the hospital, and it is believed that she is stillborn. Now, this was a plot point that was going to be probably picked up later, according to some behind-the-scenes stuff. Apparently, it was going to be picked up during the final chapter, which came out a couple of years later after the Clone Saga, and the story was
hinted pretty heavily that she was alive during his second run.
Yeah, DeFalco throughout his second run actually had small bits and hints of toying with the fact that maybe May is probably alive. Allison Monaghan was on and off, played a big role. She was introduced during the Revelation storyline, and she made several cameos during the DeFalco run, second DeFalco run on Amazing. So this all leads to about 1998, the final chapter storyline, where it wasn't Baby May that was brought back, it was Aunt May.
Hey, all those pictures of the crib that we thought was Baby May, LOL, it's a cat.
Exactly.
And comics fandom collectively threw up our arms like, what the hell? Who wanted this?
Bob Harris. And
well, I know now the answer.
Well, that's because Bob Harris is the walking apocalypse.
Be nice.
Well, that's playing out right over at the distinguished competition.
Yeah.
Actually, it belongs. Which wrestler is it that's the walking apocalypse? Someone's screaming at their somebody's screaming at their MP3 player right now. I can't remember who.
I don't watch wrestling, and I don't care.
The Undertaker or Kane, probably.
We just lost 5 listeners right there.
Yeah, probably. Anyway, so at this point, May is thought to be dead, and there's no mentioning of her again. Now, we don't know if that's actually Baby May in the storyline One More Day. There's an assumption that the girl in red was Mary Jane and Peter's kid, that she was wiped away from history, and then Mitt came around. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because in 1998, Bob Harris, who, to his credit, gave DeFalco a chance to say, hey, what if the baby lived? What would happen? So there was a story. So Tom DeFalco and Ron Friends sat, and I think, did Zombie Simba do the inks?
No, it was Bill
Sienkiewicz. It was your favorite inker ever.
Bill Sienkiewicz, my favorite inker. Yes, that's right. Bill Sienkiewicz, Ron Friends, and Tom DeFalco crafted a story in What If 105. What if the baby lived? And that's the issue that we're going to talk about now.
Indeed, we will. And I'll have the recap right now. Okay, first thing we should probably know about What If number 105 is that much like Amazing Fantasy 15, there is a secondary story in here that nobody remembers.
Yeah, no.
Do either of you guys know what it is?
No, I've only got the Zero issue.
I've read What If 105, and I don't even remember it.
There's a story called What If Bucky Had Remained Captain America's Partner. I've never heard of this until today. I've never read this story. I don't know what the deal is, but it exists. Much like those secondary stories in Amazing Fantasy 15.
That nobody's ever read.
$5 if either of you remembers it.
No.
Which stories they are.
I can visually see them, but I don't remember them now.
It is The Bell Ringer,
yeah.
The Man in the Mummy Case, and There Are Martians Among Us.
Yeah, I remember this.
In retrospect, yeah, I think
really?
that little Spider-Man story probably was a safe bet to be the only one people remember based on this.
And they wonder why the title was canceled.
Well, much like all of their anthology books, it was just a sort of weird combination of science fiction and fantasy stories. The fact that there was a superhero story in there was actually more of an aberration than these stories were. By the way, they're all by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, so
yeah.
Even weirder little historical footnote. But anyway, What If number 105, or as Jason alluded to, Spider-Girl number 0, as it would be reprinted later when Spider-Girl went to series. It had a script and a plot by Tom DeFalco, pencils and a co-plot by Ron Friends, finishes by Bill Sienkiewicz, colors by Matt Webb. And I'm going to mention the lettering right now. I never do this when I do these recaps, but it's important in this case because it's been changed. In the original version, the lettering is by Chris Eliopoulos, correct?
Yes.
In the digests, it's been re-lettered by Dave Sharp.
Really?
Yes, this is something I should probably bring up right now, since we're on the subject of all these various prints of these things. When Marvel started doing the digest around, 2004 or somewhere around there?
Something like that.
When they shrunk it down, I guess for whatever reason they decided it wasn't legible enough, or I don't know what the reasoning behind it is, but they decided, you know what, we're going to have all of these books relettered, so all of the Spider-Girl stories that appear in digest form, up until whatever issue they started actually doing digital lettering, have been relettered by Dave Sharp. And another weird digest note, by the way, the cover of the Volume 1 of the digest uses the cover from issue 63. I have no idea why that decision was made, but...
That's true.
Very, very strange. Okay, we begin, as usual, at the beginning. Midtown High School, to be exact, where Peter and Mary Jane watch their daughter May in a basketball game. Suddenly, May displays superhuman levels of ups, and both Peter and Mary Jane realize the implications.
She's feeling loose and slamming heat.
That's a recurring...
Sorry,
rule.
couldn't resist. That shows up like 2 or 3 times in the issue.
Yeah, it's a recurring phrase for a few issues, if I recall.
Yeah, I think it shows up later.
Then again, my memory is exceptionally poor.
Anyway, continue. I apologize.
Never apologize. I don't. Oh, wait, I'm on the wrong podcast for that.
Broadcast crossing of the streams.
After the game, May meets her parents, and both she and her father sense something is awry as a silhouetted figure lurks outside of the window. May heads off with some friends, while Peter and MJ go home, recollecting how May entered their lives and how Peter's career as Spider-Man ended. I'll put a big asterisk next to that, because we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I think we'll have to.
Mainly because it doesn't quite jive, but we'll discuss that. Meanwhile, as May walks with her friends, she's attacked by the Green Goblin, who asks her to deliver a message to her father that they have, quote, unfinished business. She goes straight home and tells her parents, and they try to downplay the significance of it to her. After Mary Jane sort of shepherds her up, May upstairs, Peter immediately suspects that it could be Normie Osborn, son of Harry and grandson of Norman, as he calls Foggy Nelson, Normie's stepfather. Peter and MJ struggle over whether or not to tell Mayday the truth, that Peter was in fact Spider-Man, but May overhears the conversation from the stairs and discovers the secret anyway. The next day, Peter tries to visit the Fantastic Five and the Avengers for help, but the F5 are unavailable, as they generally tend to be in stories like this. How many times has Spider-Man been like, oh, I'll go get Reed Richards for help, and they're in space or the negative zone or something. And he gets cold feet when he meets the Avengers because he sees how young they look and green, and he doesn't quite feel safe going to them for help. Meanwhile, May experiments with her powers in the school gym, quite enjoying it, in fact, and later, she and Mary Jane discuss the matter. Mary Jane shows May Peter's costume up in the attic, and by extension, Ben Reilly's, while Peter goes to confront the Goblin alone at the Brooklyn Bridge. Spider-Man drinking game, warning if you have Brooklyn Bridge mentions there. Mary Jane arrives on the scene, followed shortly by May, in costume for the first time as Spider-Girl. She battles the Goblin and, after a short fight, defeats him by webbing his pumpkin bomb into his hand and causing it to concuss him. Normie's arrested, while raving about the existence of a Spider-Girl that no one takes seriously. And the next morning, May and her parents burn the costume. Although, the very last panel reveals that she may already be working on another. The end. All in all, a very interesting origin story. With a lot of characters and things that we'll get to discussing right now.
I want to say something right quick, because this is something that DeFalco mentions a lot when he talks about Spider-Girl. And I'll compare it to Amazing Fantasy 15, because obviously the two are related very clearly. In Amazing Fantasy 15, Peter doesn't stop the burglar goes and kills Uncle Ben. In Spider-Girl number 0, Peter goes to stop the Green Goblin, and May saves his life and defeats the Goblin. So, whereas Peter had to have a life lost to become a hero, May saved a life to become a hero.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's a good point, actually.
Yeah. So I know people say, "Well, she just like Peter." That's a fundamental difference between the two. May is a hero because it's in her genes. Literally in her genes. So there's that.
Well, I find it kind of interesting that she ended up taking her uncle's costume instead of her father's. I'm glad she did, because I think it looks good.
Do you know why?
I mean, I don't remember if there's an in-story reason. I know. Yeah, I think Ron Friends and Tom DeFalco said they used to discuss how the Ben Reilly costume would look good on a female. And
actually, that was
it looks. Buscema. Oh, was that Buscema? Okay, but I don't know if they give an in-store. I can't remember if they give an in-story reason for it.
No,
she just sort of sees it in the trunk and is interested by it. I assume for her perspective, she just picked whichever one looked better. The question I want to know is how she got it to fit her so tightly in that short time frame.
Yeah,
because she does swing into battle, and it does just completely fit her, like with a very flattering cut. So she must have like taken some real quick stitching into that stuff. Well, and we didn't actually see it.
It's established later that Mary Jane is quite handy with costuming.
True, but then again, Mary Jane was headed to the bridge. We don't quite know. There's some interesting things we could talk about here. You could argue that the material that Ben used originally with the costume was incredibly stretchy. Well, he did steal it from but it was also from the drama department, right?
Yeah, the drama.
I thought that was the hoodie he stole from the department store.
Well, no, the hoodie he stole from the American Museum of Natural History.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering Sensational Number 0 correctly, and I haven't read this in years, but if I'm remembering that story correctly, he steals it from the costuming department of a college, right?
Yeah, I think it was ESU that he stole it from.
Well, it's a Spider-Man story, of course. If there's a college in it, it's going to be ESU.
And that happened, but it also was pretty well thrashed with twice. So he had to make this must have been the third version of the costume, because it was thrashed really badly with during Blood Brothers, and it was thrashed obviously in Revelation.
Yeah, is she wearing the suit he died in? Because that's kind of
that's morbid, right?
No, because he takes it off, because when he gets impaled with the Goblin Glider, he's wearing jeans and the jacket.
Yeah, but he was. Right. But even before that, it was ripped up pretty bad with the battle.
Yes, it was. But my point is, he wasn't wearing it when he died.
No.
Or was his clothes over it? I don't remember.
No, he wore Peter's clothes.
No, because he disintegrates, remember, and all that's left is his clothes. There's no costume under it.
Yeah, it's Peter's clothes that he disintegrated in.
Okay, yeah. All this reveals is that I have a very lousy memory, and I need to reread these stories again soon.
You will, in Cloneslayer Chronicles.
That sounds more like a threat than anything else.
Yes, you will.
Well, Sensational Number 0, I might be reading by the end of the week, so, right?
Yep.
Well, whatever. Hey, we're just sort of rolling into it. Why don't we start talking about some of the specifics of this story? Specifically, the first thing to jump right out at you, what about the character of May? What do you think about her?
I like her. She's not Peter. I like that she's much more of a social butterfly, but she does have that firm sense of responsibility. And you kind of only see a little bit of it in the first issue, but she's much more of a social butterfly like Mary Jane.
We do get that scene right after the basketball game. There are two distinct groups of people that want to hang out with her. She goes to hang out with the nerds, but the cool kids want to hang out with her too.
Yeah. Well, I get the feeling that she kind of inherited the best aspects of both Peter and Mary Jane. Obviously, Peter's intelligence, but Mary Jane's outgoingness. I think Spider-Girl is an extrovert, whereas Peter Parker is definitely an introvert.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. So I feel like she kind of has a bit of Mary Jane's personality with Peter's responsibility and his stubbornness.
Absolutely. And she sort of looks like, from an artistic perspective, she sort of looks like the two of them smashed together. She has the chin cleft and the dimples of Mary Jane, but generally she has Peter's hair.
It's much more pronounced with whenever Friends becomes the regular artist on the title, on the ongoing.
Yes.
Much more.
She's Olive.
Yeah, Olive, he kind of made her look more like Peter, and with Friends, she looks much more like her mom.
Yeah, with the exception of she's got Peter's hair.
Yeah, especially in these earliest May's earliest hairstyle, which is very short.
Mm-hmm. In this story, though, visually she looks a little different than what we're going to get used to. I noticed, flipping through this in particular, she has a very pronounced profile in her nose.
Yes.
Did you notice that? It sort of has a, I don't know is that what you would call the Roman nose? I can't quite remember, but she's got it slopes outward rather than inward, which is the school of, drawing comic book females. Females? Is that you always draw inwardly sloping noses. It's a really strange choice, but one that works, because she definitely looks distinctive, I'll say that.
And her look's going to be altered quite a bit to fit more of Pat Olive's style. But we'll get to that in the first issue.
I also noticed that for the most part, she seems to have black hair in this story.
In the brown, almost story, black hair.
It's black. It's kind of like my mother has very, very dark brown hair, and it actually looks black, and you can only tell it's brown if the light hits it in a certain way.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I was under the impression that was the kind of hair she's supposed to have.
Yeah.
Until she gets the makeover in like issue 63.
Yeah.
But that's a long way down the line.
Well, she gets a makeover in 25 that also is very brown, but
yeah.
Especially in the first, because I seem to recall in the first two, I seem to recall, I'm flipping through the digest right now. In the first 2 or 3 issues of the series proper, her hair is actually black. Yeah. As in, like, it's black and has dark gray highlights, as you would normally do black hair. So, yeah. I wonder if that was just a miscommunication, or if that was a conscious decision.
There's a part where it's got brown highlights in issue 0.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely, but I'm just saying a little bit down the road, it sort of changes to black very briefly before coming back around to being brown again.
Oh, yeah. First issue, it's definitely black, but it ends up going back to brown.
And that may have been Pat Olive, shading that in like it's black.
Actually, in a couple issues later, there's actually a bit of some of the shading's actually kind of reddish. Mm-hmm. So maybe her hair color is like maybe that's a mutation. Her hair color changes depending on her mood.
I also noticed that May wears glasses on a couple of pages in this story.
Yeah, those eventually go away.
Well, I mean, those go away real fast because I don't seem to remember her wearing glasses otherwise.
I thought it was supposed to be like, kind of like, remember in the early Spider-Man, he wore glasses, but even though he didn't need to after he got bit by the spider, and eventually he just stopped wearing them. I was under the impression it was kind of like that. Once her powers started kicking in, her eyesight kind of got fixed, and she just didn't need the glasses anymore.
But it's weird because we never previously established that she had poor eyesight. In fact, the only scene where you see her with glasses is after her powers manifest. So it's weird, I don't know. It's just a stylistic thing. I did notice that when you take into account the way she's dressed and the glasses and such in that scene, I got a very Ultimate Spider-Man vibe from it, even though this story predates that by a couple of years, so... I don't know, just a little vague thing.
Really? Really? You don't say. Yeah,
yes.
I know. Wow. Oy vey. I'll stop now.
Jokes that have not been beaten into the ground number. Of course, Peter and Mary Jane reappear in this story.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay! Yeah, exactly.
It's very much in line with how DeFalco wrote them during the Clone Saga. I mean, look, everybody talks about, the Clone Saga and the Spider-Girl. They're two synonymous things. They are. You can't have one without the other. Unlike the actual Spider-Man books that were being published at the time, DeFalco wasn't afraid to reference the good and bad of his tenure as AIC. And I heard somebody once mention that Spider-Girl was basically what if Tom DeFalco had remained EIC indefinitely of Marvel. There's so much DeFalco influence. You got Thunderstrike in A-Next. You got the Fantastic Five takes a lot of elements from DeFalco's Fantastic Four run.
Because Lyja is there?
Yeah, Lyja actually shows up. No, sorry, she doesn't show up in issue 0, though she shows up later. But there's a picture of her when you see when he walks into the Fantastic Five headquarters.
And that was done on purpose, though.
I like Lyja. I thought that was a cool tool. I like that.
The whole touches of the Avengers and the Fantastic Five. That's done on purpose. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I didn't like is that they call the X-Men the X-People now. That just doesn't roll off the tongue very well.
Spider-Girl takes place in a very politically correct future. What can I say?
I know, and I'm not trying to bash DeFalco because I love Tom DeFalco. I'm just saying X-People just doesn't sound right to me. Like, A-Next, that's fine. Fantastic Five, X-People.
Speaking of the various teams, the Avengers are seen in this issue. They have a very interesting membership here. It's Jubilee, Speedball, Thunderstrike, J2, Jolt, and Vision. The Vision's on the screen. I don't quite remember what his role is here, but that's not the team that we're going to get when A-Next debuts as a series.
It is.
They're there for the first issue, and then they quickly disband.
But J2 and Thunderbolt are there.
J2 and Thunderstrike become permanent
Sorry,
members.
Thunderstrike.
Right.
But those are the only two of this group that remain members.
Yeah, that's right.
Beyond the first issue of A-Next, but that's something we'll cover much later down the road.
Yeah. Our primary focus is Spider-Girl, so.
Quick thing, we were talking about, kind of how this references DeFalco's style. There's an old quote I found from DeFalco from an interview that I wanted to mention. I guess this was an interview with The Pulse, and someone asked him, a lot of people characterize the MC2 universe, side note, that's the official name of the universe where Spider-Girl takes place in, as having an old-school feel. Why do you think modern comic readers want to read something that feels like the best of the Silver Age? And DeFalco says, we are old school because A, our heroes act like heroes, B, we don't believe in decompression, C, we tell single-issue stories with subplots that build from issue to issue, and D, there's a lot of action and angst in every issue.
That's pretty much describes exactly what we're going to get in Spider-Girl.
And it's awesome!
That's one of the things I love about it. But in relation to this first issue, this first issue is a bit of an odd duck in that it looks and feels a lot darker than the rest of the series would.
Well, yeah, but also it was just supposed to, I think it was just supposed to be a one-off issue without I don't think he was considering making it a series when they just said,
well,
oh, hey.
Well, that's an interesting point of discussion, though. Because I was sort of angling towards mentioning all the characters that show up and such, and they go out of their way to establish the F5 and the Avengers. But more importantly than that, we get pretty much, with the exception of Phil Urich, who doesn't show up until Spider-Girl #1, we get pretty much all of the major supporting cast that will be established in the first year or two of the series. I mean, we get Davina and Courtney and Jimmy and Moose and Brad Miller, and they're all there.
Well, I'll say this. This was designed as a... Remember the Clone Saga miniseries?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The one that came out a couple years ago?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The one that was written by DeFalco and Mackie. Do you remember in the interview that was done with Spider-Man Crawlspace, DeFalco and Mackie, you remember that they were like, hey, this could be a backdoor pilot as an ongoing Ben Reilly series. Methinks that DeFalco and friends kind of came at this like, what if we made this into a backdoor pilot and see what it goes?
I'm 100% on board with you, and to me, the evidence is the number of characters that are established.
Yeah.
With almost no context. I mean, they wouldn't, in an ordinary story like this, you wouldn't name characters like Jimmy Yama if they weren't going to ever show up again. All of her friends are there. We learn their names. We learn a little bit about them, and then they just disappear because that's their only scene that they're in for a lot of them.
Yeah.
Which does strike me as a sort of backdoor pilot thing. I mean, Amazing Fantasy 15 is a good example of this.
Yeah.
We have the scene in the beginning, he's Midtown High, he's only a professional wallflower, that whole thing. We know who Flash Thompson is, but there are a whole bunch of other students there who are never named, and they won't even be given names until 4 or 5 issues into Amazing Spider-Man.
Right.
Just because at the time it just wasn't something that they had just planned. So.
Right, absolutely, and we see this with TV shows all the time, especially if NCIS is the one, and JAG, and
I was going to say
a
recent example for people, for NCIS watchers. They just spun off a New Orleans version of the show out of an episode of NCIS, I believe.
Yes, they did. And they tried to do what was called NCIS Red on NCIS LA. And try to make it like the 4th generation show, the first 4th generation show, because it came from JAG, NCIS, NCIS LA. But they didn't pick it up to pilot status. But it looks like they're going to do NCIS New Orleans.
And oftentimes with these things, there'll be little retools in between.
Right. And if you watch...
like, actors will change. Sometimes they'll drop a character here and there.
They did that with NCIS LA. One of the main characters that appears in the backdoor pilot on NCIS... She dies off panel, like
really?
Yeah, she died in a later episode of NCIS. She dies. She doesn't appear at all in NCIS LA, and she dies off panel. Like you just see this charred body, and that's her.
Talk about television off screen. Yeah, that's interesting. But something similar sort of happens here, I think, with Spider-Girl, where I think there's a tonal change between this issue and the first one.
Oh, the first
absolutely.
issue is a lot lighter.
Mm-hmm.
This is dark story.
This is dark.
Yeah, this is dark.
Visually dark too. It's dark looking.
But that's Sienkiewicz's. That's his fault.
Well, I mean, it could have very well been a conscious decision. I don't know if Sienkiewicz was...
I'll be honest with you, this may have been some of Sienkiewicz's best inking I've ever seen.
I wonder how much of that comes down to... I wish I could see the pencils for this.
I think
because Friends is a relatively tight penciler. I mean, Friends' art looks like... I mean, look at the faces in this story. These look like Ron Friend's faces.
Yeah.
Just ink with squiggly lines instead of with straight lines. Yeah. So I wonder how much of that comes down to the fact that...
I've seen the...
that Sienkiewicz just
pencils.
like takes a bottle of ink, splashes it on a page, and calls it a day.
No. I've seen the pencils on like the scene where she first appears in the costume.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty tightly penciled.
That to me is the iconic shot of maybe this entire series. Right there in the first issue is where she swings in.
That's one of my favorite ones, yeah.
Virtually every Spider-Man encyclopedia that you ever read that has a Spider-Girl entry will have that page on it.
Yeah. It's just that good.
Well, if we're going to start talking about things we like, we may as well start getting into specific pros and cons.
Okay, pros and cons. I'll go with pros. I love the cover. I thought the cover's simplistic. It gets the point across. It makes you interested in what comes next. I love Ron Friends as the artist. It's sad that he doesn't come in and become the regular artist, but I think he had a regular penciling assignment, and he just came in to do this.
He comes in eventually, though.
He becomes the regular penciler. After I think issue 50.
So he halfway through Season of the Serpent.
That's right.
Because if you recall, the series was going to be canceled.
Yep.
Yes.
So they brought Friends in to finish it because Pat Olive got a different assignment.
Yes.
And then when it was uncanceled, they got caught their pants down. So Friends became the regular artist.
Yeah.
Like but, Friends is the artist I associate with Spider-Girl more than any other artist. So.
Well, he did the majority of it if you're going to count raw issues. So.
I mean, anytime there was a fill-in issue, that was Ron Friends. He did the opening issue, that was Ron Friends. And then after Season of the Serpent, there's an exaggerated style when Friends comes back on that gets softened towards the end of the run. That, like, really around issue like 75 is when it really starts getting tight, and Buscema and him are hitting a groove.
Yeah, that was a brief flirtation into something else that I think we'll talk about when we get there.
Yes, we will.
There's a very deliberate movement towards slightly more cheesecake art that I've heard implied may have been editorially mandated.
Yes,
but
it was editorially mandated.
But even when it was, it's still fairly classy compared to the rest of comic books. I mean, Spider-Girl's costume shows no skin. I mean, she's like one of the only
But it's
she's
skin
the only
tight.
Okay, but she's still not overly sexualized the way I think most female superheroes are.
Yeah, she's much more wholesome than most female superheroes. I mean, how many people remember? I know all three people in this podcast will remember the Fantastic Four window boobs. I mean,
that's the only way to call it, really.
Yeah, Fantastic Four window boobs. I mean,
you mean when Mrs. Fantastic borrowed Power Girl's costume and colored it blue?
Yeah, I made it in the shape of a fork.
Because that's all that was.
Yeah, that's exactly what that was.
Without a cape, which just made it look trashy.
Yeah.
And or sleeves, for that matter. But DeFalco did keep Friends busy, though. I mean, Friends was the regular artist on A-Next.
Yeah.
He drew both the Buzz and Dark Devil miniseries.
God, that Dark Devil miniseries is awesome. Oh, I love that thing, man.
I like them both, actually.
I never read the Buzz.
The Buzz is an interesting one because just skimming through a couple of these things today as I put together the little schedule that I'm trying to figure out how to approach
you get your
podcast.
whiteboard out?
Well, I'm using Excel because I don't quite have a whiteboard or the space to hang a whiteboard. But you piece things together. The Buzz dovetails very tightly with Spider-Girl.
Yes.
Very tightly. In fact, there's a scene in issue 12 of Spider-Girl that is retold in Buzz #1 from his perspective.
Nice.
As in, like, he walks into a scene, something happens, and then he walks out of the scene. In the Spider-Girl issue, we may stay with May. In the Buzz #1, he walks off panel, and then he continues up the hallway.
That's just a Falco, like, world building and, like, kicking ass.
Yeah, and same dialogue. I actually double-checked the art. She's wearing the correct outfit and everything. It's crazy.
Yeah. Never
noticed that until today. But what a tangent. We're supposed to be talking about your pros right now.
Okay, obviously, DeFalco and Friends, they're like peanut butter and jelly when it comes to a writer-artist combo. They know each other's tendencies, they know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and they play to those strengths. I mean, they've been together now for 30 years. on and off, working together. So, I mean, those guys know each other like the back of their hands, artistically.
It's also interesting to know that they even collaborate on things unofficially. I bet you didn't know this, but when DeFalco was writing Legion Lost, sometimes Ron Frenz was getting a special thanks to Ron Frenz things because they call each other and just talk about stories. Just because.
Yeah.
I mean, Frenz isn't getting paid
that
for it, but they're just talking.
So happy.
Frenz doesn't get paid for co-plotting a Legion Lost story at DC, but he sure as hell had something to do with it.
Have you not heard the 3 different interviews with Frenz and DeFalco on Crawlspace? I mean, Frenz is like, he's got so many ideas for stories. And DeFalco's like, yeah, but I would love to be a fly on the wall when they're talking on the phone. Straight up.
And which just makes it even more of a disgrace, in my opinion, that neither of those guys has a regular gig right now.
Absolutely.
I thought DeFalco was like working for Archie Comics.
Oh, no.
Well, that's where he started. That's how DeFalco got his start, was in Archie.
I mean, Frenz is a fill-in artist at IDW and occasionally DC, and these are guys that should be working on top-flight pilot books for your companies that they'll put out consistently on time, consistent quality level. These guys are machines. These are the dudes that you build companies around. Why are they sitting on the sidelines watching people like Olivier Coipel not make any of his deadlines and delay everything that he works on? What a disgrace that is. I'm sorry. It just pisses me off.
But no, Ron Frenz and Sabi Sumo just recently did two issues of Spider-Man. How awesome was that?
Yeah, that's another one. Buscema is just, he's retired outside of working with Ron Frenz, and he just does it because he likes it. Yeah. Isn't that great?
Okay, but here's the thing. And
he worked on Spider-Man and in the Marvel Universe for 40 years. I mean, it's awesome.
But here's the thing, if I can just interject for a second. I completely agree with everything you're saying, but it's not just them. It's kind of happened to everyone who worked in comics in like the 80s and 90s. I mean, Walt Simonson's like a master of his craft, and he doesn't really get mainstream work all that much anymore, aside from occasionally he'll do like a variant cover on Thor, or I think he did a few issues of the Avengers a few years ago when Bendis was still on the title. So a lot of the guys that we all love and who, at one point were these giant names in the industry, and I kind of think they still should be, they don't have the prestige they used to, and I don't really understand that, but it seems like, to me, for comic writers and artists, with exceptions of people like Grant Morrison, or I'm not trying to compare the two, but John Romita Jr., people who can kind of keep themselves relevant, they kind of phase out after a period of 10 or so years.
Romita Jr. and Bagley are probably the two most classic examples of guys that have been doing this for 30 years and they still get consistent work.
Yes.
And it's not coincidental that both of those guys are friggin' page rate machines.
And it's also not coincidental that they may have made so much money in licensing of their images. It's stupid. I mean, from 2000 to 2009, if it was a comic Spider-Man, it was Mark Bagley.
Yep.
Straight up.
Yep.
I mean, there's no telling how much. That dude is rolling in dough. He doesn't have to work another day in his life.
He deserves it.
Well, now, hold on. We don't know that, because he could very well be getting screwed by like, a very unfavorable licensing deal here. We don't know.
That's true. He should be rolling in dough. Let's put it that way. He should be rolling in dough.
Well, yeah, but again, the only, names like J.M. DeMatteis, Chris Claremont, Jerry Conway, those don't hold the weight they used to, even though these guys have done, some of the best work in the industry. I mean, Chris Claremont's 17-year stint on X-Men has yet to be matched as far as the X-Men is concerned, in my opinion. Well, and the only people I can think of who are still around are, however you feel about them personally, because at least one of them is really divisive, like, Grant Morrison or Peter David, who have managed either, in Grant Morrison's case, reinvent himself because, he's trying some new drug or something. Or Peter David, who's kind of managed I guess I've heard some people say that he modernized his writing, and I love Tom DeFalco, and I like his writing, but the complaint I hear from people who don't like it is it feels too 80s, which is one of the reasons why I like it. But people say that Peter David is when he was writing in the 80s, it felt like the 80s, but now he writes like a modern writer.
I'll be honest with you. I did discuss this on
Peter David's
CSC.
listening. I love your work. Don't hurt me.
We discussed DeFalco's writing quite a bit on an episode of CSC that will be released soon. But you're right. I mean, DeFalco has a very, to me, I call it a workman mentality. He has the tendency to be great. He can be great, but it's always going to be good. Now, there's some bad story elements. See CSC if you want to know more. Because we just got done with Cyber War, and that was.
Yeah, Tom, I love you. Tom, I love you. You're probably my favorite comic. Tom DeFalco, I love you. You're probably my favorite comic book writer ever. I think I might actually say that. You have no excuse for Cyber War, man. What were you doing? What was that?
But
Tom.
Yeah, no,
maybe he was on a cyberpunk binge.
I don't know. Who knows? But maybe he was watching Freakazoid. Who knows? But I'll be honest with you. I'll finish my prose right quick. I love Peter having that urge to be heroic, and May coming in and saying, and I love that there's a pass the torch moment, because that we talked about that image a little bit earlier. That moment where she kicks the goblin in the face. That's the passing of the torch. That's
when she webs the pumpkin bomb into Normie's hand, Peter practically fist pumps and is like, yes, she outsmarted him.
Absolutely, and I love the storytelling throughout the book, and that's okay. I'm done with my part.
If I can just add a thing I like, again, completely in agreement. I suspect that's going to be happening a lot here. But I also like that, when Peter shows up, and he shows up by himself to protect his family, Mary Jane shows up afterwards because she cares about her family and her husband, and she's not going to let anything hurt them. And Mary Jane's one of my favorite characters, and I like it when she's portrayed as the strong character she actually is, and you get to see that here, and that makes me smile.
It raises questions as to exactly what they think they're going to accomplish. You can argue that it's pretty damn stupid that they just sort of show up and try to fight him, but I think...
Well, Peter's got a gun, so...
But there's a recurring element in the story where Peter doesn't want to go to the cops, A, because this isn't the kind of thing they handle, but also, how do you go to the cops and tell them the Green Goblin's after you without telling them that you're Spider-Man and that your daughter may be following in your footsteps shortly? Almost impossible situation, so it's almost impossible to state that as a con of the story, really. I'll throw a pro in here. I like that, as established in this story, unlike what you see a lot of times in superhero comics, May has a very strong relationship with her parents.
Yeah.
There's a point in the story where, after she's sort of testing out her powers, she goes home and she just talks to Mary Jane about all this stuff. Like, she just tells Mary Jane she overheard them off. It's so insignificant that she would just tell them that it happens off panel. Then she just goes home, she's like, oh yeah, by the way, I overheard that stuff. And then she and Mary Jane talk for a little bit. Mary Jane shows her the costume and stuff like that.
But I think...
Like, they don't have anything to hide here.
But that's another cool thing, is I think it shows that Peter and Mary Jane would have made good parents, especially in light of their own upbringing. Yeah, Peter had a good... Aunt May and Uncle Ben were good to him, but, he's an orphan, and Mary Jane comes from an utterly broken home, and I think it's cool that they can kind of overcome their early reservations and stuff that they're kind of afraid they might screw up, and be actually really good parents that have a good, stable family.
Mm-hmm. And you see with Peter in this story, they also establish quite a bit of history with him. There's almost an offhand allusion, and it's taken for granted now in the post-Bendis era, but he makes a vague allusion to the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, I used to be an Avenger at some point, which happened entirely off screen. We're not talking about his reserve membership or whatever. He was an Avenger at some point, but
I thought that was referring to his reserve status.
Well,
again, this is pre-Bendisers.
Yes, it is. This is the one con I have in this story, which is that there's some weird continuity stuff in here. The origin that they give when Peter and Mary Jane are sort of walking home, they're discussing all the things that they've seen. With May starting to exhibit powers. And they reminisce about Peter's last days as Spider-Man, and it completely eliminates the whole Allison Mongrain and taking the baby angle away, out of the story.
But that gets mentioned touched on in later issues.
I know, but what I'm saying is, in this issue, so far as we know, if this is the only issue you read, and you didn't read the other ones, it was a normal birth. Mary Jane gave birth to a child, and then Peter got his leg blown off.
Well, yeah, but the original premise is, what if the baby had lived? Because as far as the the main continuity was concerned, and
I know
was
that's
dead.
That's my point. At some point after this story was written and published, they changed their mind on that aspect for dramatic reasons, presumably, or to solidify a different point of departure. If we establish, say, when do you think Peter got his leg hurt and when the Goblin was killed? Was it around the time of Gathering of Five?
I was under the impression that's when it was.
That's what's established later on, but there's not a clear defined area with in regards to this issue. It is during the issues like 47 through 50, when Peter and May have their conversation, he talks about Norman was in the middle of this mumbo-jumbo gathering crap, and that's what happened.
Yeah, it's basically an alternate. Imagine if the Gathering of the Five hadn't sucked. I mean, that's more or less what happened. That's how I took it.
But then you get into interesting situations where later we start to see things like Peter and Mary Jane as parents, with Peter having both of his legs.
Yeah.
That just seem to completely contradict these things.
My understanding was, again, that the Gathering of the Five doesn't happen as soon as it does in the comics. Sorry, in the main continuity, it happens a bit later. I was in the impression they also get May back relatively quickly. Like, within a couple of weeks is when Kane brings her back. And then maybe, 4 to 6 months down the line, that's when he gets his leg blown off.
Well, this is all stuff we'll have to figure out as we go, because there certainly isn't a straight answer, and that's things we'll be discussing in later episodes as we hit them.
You know what? It's still not as confusing as Avengers Disassembled continuity-wise.
I think we could say this, at least, especially as established in this story, and issue number 1 and 2, is that Spider-Girl has a very, I wouldn't say definitive, but it has a very obvious precedent, and the seedings of this series can all be found in those comics of the late 90s.
Yeah.
Up to, but not including Gathering of Five.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things are carried over from it, one of which we see in this issue, which is that Foggy Nelson and Liz Allen are married around the time when, after post-Clone Saga, I believe, when you have, like, Citizen Osborn and those stories, when they were very definitely together. As far as this story is concerned, they stayed together, and he became Normie's stepfather. Weird little side note, though. This is the only issue in which we see Liz Allen alive. Because she dies off-panel after the story.
Does she?
Mm-hmm. Can't quite remember what she dies of. I think it's in the annual.
Oh, I don't have the annual.
That might be the only place where they mention it. Like, they just sort of offhandedly mention, she had a stroke.
Oh, is that it?
And then she later died. I don't know what the deal is with that. I don't recall ever getting anything specific, but we see her as a ghost in flashbacks later, but this is the only time we see her alive, and of course she has nothing to say, because sadly she's already been laid up with a stroke in this story. Anybody else got any cons to throw out there?
Bill Sinkovitz.
No,
really? Like,
I don't think even Bill is a con in this one. And that's the first and only time I will ever say that. Ever.
Well, that's not true.
It's not,
because you also like that watercolor painting from around the Peter and Mary Jane wedding era. That was Sinkovitz also.
That's fair enough. No, I mean, I like his painting. I just don't really care for his inking. Don't get me wrong. It's not like Spectacular Spider-Man 222 bad. It's actually pretty decent, but to me it still takes away from Ron Franz's art. It's not, I'd give it an A-. It's not enough to, drop it to a B or anything. If I was pressed for a negative, that's probably the only thing I could come up with. And even then, it's only a minor quibble, because he's fairly restrained here, as opposed to just, throwing a Rorschach on it and calling it a day.
This isn't Spider-Side inking, era inking Sienkiewicz. This isn't quite New Mutant Sienkiewicz, but this isn't Depth of the Clone Saga Sienkiewicz either. I don't know if I would count that as a pro.
I liked him when he was on Daredevil.
That's because it usually fit the tone of the story.
Right. I certainly wouldn't. I don't think I would like this series as much if he was the regular inker on the book after this. It would be very different, I think, tonally, just by the visuals alone.
Yeah.
What did you say, Jason? You said you think this is an A- sort of story. Why don't we assign some grades to this? What do you say, Zach?
I say I'm going to give it an A-. No A-. A, just straight A. No pluses or minuses. A. Really good start to a series.
I'll agree with you there. I think if I didn't know that this was a one-off story, and that if this is the issue number 1 of Spider-Girl, I would say this is the perfect issue number 1. The fact that this was a one-off story, that whether or not, conspiracy theories aside, whether you think this is a backdoor pilot or not, as a one-issue story, I don't know quite if it works as well. Just because there are a lot of things that are introduced here that just never get followed up on because of the nature of the story. That sort of sit there as world building for a world that wouldn't exist beyond this story. So if this is a one-shot, it would probably be a B+ sort of story. But as the kickoff to an ongoing series, this is about as well as you can do it. I'd say this is probably an A+. The only way I could imagine
When was
this
the last time you heard a Gerard Delatour podcast with an A+, folks? I'm just saying.
Oh, come on. I know I've given something an A+ on Close
Didn't you give ASM 400 an A+?
I was dying when you did that episode, and I was not on it.
Oh, that's right. That's why I got pulled in.
Yeah, he was doing his best Aunt May impression.
He'd hired an actress to die for him?
Yes!
I did not know you had that kind of money, Gerard.
So, thus ended What If number 105. You should probably mention a little bit about What If.
Zero.
Yeah, / Spider-Girl Zero. I don't think What If went for another year beyond this.
No, not this.
I've never actually.
Volume.
It's the only What If I've ever actually read, with the exception of like some stuff that gets reprinted in the back of a trade.
Yeah, they tend to throw those in there too. This is actually the second volume of What If, right?
Yes.
This is the second volume of What If, and this was like towards the end of like the rebranding of What If. Like,
yeah, that's right. They went darker and edgier.
They went dark, and that may have been why Sienkiewicz was brought in as inker too. All right, so to kind of wrap this up, we have now covered the origin of Spider-Girl. Now let's talk a little bit about the origin of the series. So this is going to kind of dovetail into our next episode, which will cover issue 1 of the Spider-Girl series, hosted by Mr. Gerard. But I wanted to kind of before we start putting a bow on this thing, I wanted to kind of talk about what the original concept of the MC2 Universe, as was mentioned by Mr. Jason, was. And the concept was to take 3 comics that were to be marketed and bundled together and sold at Walmart stores. Now, at the time, around 98, Walmart had pulled out of the comics market completely, and this was an attempt by Bob Harris to bring a all-ages line of comics that was relatively continuity light. Now, if you're a new reader and you have no idea what's going on, you can read these stories and know exactly what's going on. But this was designed to come out, and this was actually supposed to be, I'm going to use a phrase that Gerard loves, maxi series, 12-issue series that come out. All
it does is make me think of female things. That's all I'm going to say.
Anyway, but the 12-issue long series that were going to come out once a year, and then they were going to rotate out. There was going to be another character to lead the line. But there was only one character that survived throughout all of this, and this was Spider-Girl. She actually was extended past issue 12. And you'll get to that, obviously, when we get to later on. But that's what the original concept was. And
yeah, the first year was Spider-Girl, J2, and A-Next.
And then after A-Next and J2 ended, it was Fantastic 5 and Wild Thing. But I think those both only lasted for like 4 or 5 issues.
Yes.
Yes, because what happened was, like Zach just said, Spider-Girl lasted because that ended up being far and away the most popular of the group. You should mention, sometime around issue 5 or 6 of Spider-Girl, they started polling people, like in the comics, saying, all right, what do you want to see to be the next, 3 series that'll come out? And they had, the usual form. Do you want to see Fantastic 5? Do you want to see X People? Do you want to see a Wild Thing series? And so forth. So they started spinning off ideas for the second volume, and then the second volume set was...
When you talk about backdoor pilot, Fantastic 5 had a backdoor pilot in Spider-Girl.
Mm-hmm.
So,
everything... Spider-Girl is essentially the nerve center for all of this stuff. At some point, all these characters ended up showing up there.
Yeah. And it's really pronounced when you see Spider-Girl, leading the Avengers team and some of the other MC2 storylines, which we'll get to way later because it's a long way. But I kind of wanted to give the genesis of the line before we get into issue 1 of Spider-Girl.
Well, we might as well mention how it ended while we're here, which is the very same deal that Zach mentioned. That was putting these things to Walmarts and Kmarts and Targets and stuff. That deal broke down.
Yes.
Early into the second wave of MC2 titles. And thus, Fantastic 5 and Wild Thing were canceled after only 5 issues.
Yes.
And the entire thing fell apart, and leaving Spider-Girl as the only MC2 series for a while.
That also coincides with the absolute bankruptcy of Marvel and eventually Bob Harris being ousted as editor-in-chief.
Mm-hmm.
And there was much rejoicing throughout the land.
As much as I love Spider-Girl and the MC2 titles, that was damn near the death knell for all of it.
Yes.
Because it never quite recovered after that. You had a few mini-series afterwards.
And to be fair,
Around the time of the digest, it got a push. 2004.
Yeah, the digest was a complete game changer, and we'll get to that obviously as we go through the show. But and look, I've been on record not being a giant fan of Joe Quesada, but he kept
to say nothing of me.
I'm trying really hard not to say anything.
But I got to give the man credit. He did everything he could. He kept this title alive far longer than probably anybody else would. I mean, he did have a soft spot for this book. I mean, DeFalco was on record saying that, look, one of the biggest fans of Spider-Girls is Joe Quesada. So, and look, it was between that and the fans is what kept. I mean, obviously the fans are such a huge part of it. We're going to talk about the fans a lot, and we hope that the people that were just ardent supporters of this book are going to be listening to the show, and you know, you can contact us. You can email them at maydaymondays@gmail.com. We'll have the show up on iTunes pretty soon, so you can leave us a review on iTunes, or you can even call the Clone Saga Chronicles voicemail line at 818-925-6631. That's 818-9-CLONE-1. You can leave it on there, and we will play it here on Mayday Mondays. Anything else there, Gerard?
The only thing I want to say is make mine Mayday.
Make mine Mayday. Jason?
Absolutely.
All right, so with that, this has been another edition, a first edition, of Mayday Mondays here on Spidey-Dude.com, a Spidey-Dude.com production. We'll see you next time. Here.
That really sounded to me like a bunch of turds hitting a windshield rather than us. You ever been caught in one of those turd storms? It's very awkward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why are you here again?
I'm here. I'm just basically here to pass the torch and just sit back and drink beer. That's exactly what I'm here for.
Awesome.
Zach. Oh, here we go again.
Zach went full Zach.
Anyway.
Okay. I was on mute. I'll just say this right quick. Hang on. Crap. I forgot to put...
I'll just say this real quick. Wait, I'm not prepared.
No. My laptop came unplugged. Just a second. All right, here we go.
Zach, I'm a very amateur editor. Don't do this to me.
Yeah. Gerard, give us a recap. That's not a familiar phrase.
Oh, I've given quite a few of these. Peter immediately suspects that it could be Norman Osborn. No, oh my god, I can't read my own notes. Don't. I know what you guys are thinking. Don't bring up that character's name.
I know.
It will not be spoken.
I actually don't know what you're talking about. I was making a joke about how the colorist can't get her hair right.
Yeah. Well, there's other characters in Spider-Man's universe that they can't get their hair color right too. So.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking of that.
Like Gerard and I are both looking at each other awkwardly, like let's not. And then like Jason's like, what?
There are also a couple of pages
I
where
bought an issue of Amazing Spider-Man since 2007, Zach. That's why. So shut up.
Okay.
Trying not to go there, and you did. So.
Well, Marvel hasn't published an issue of Spider-Man since 2007.
But Tish.
Hi-yo!
With Stefalki and Mackie.
Defalki.
Let's split their names together. With the
latest celebrity couple.
Right.
Peter's got a gun. Peter.
Janie's got a gun. Janie Briggs got a gun. Sorry, I was watching.
The version of that I always hear on the radio is Cheney's got a gun, and that's the version I always end up singing aloud in my... I'm sorry.
Sorry, I watched Not Another Teen Movie again recently, so now I'm imagining Chris Evans in the stands with the microphone.
Janie's got a gun, run!
That's one of the only of those parodies that I actually like.
It's really great. Listeners, go watch it.
Yes.
Not Another Teen Movie. If you want to see a movie where Captain America punches a plastic bag out of the air for no apparent reason, go watch Not Another Teen Movie.
That's because Kevin Smith is nowhere to be found.
Was that when they actually broke that off? Was that during the Kevin Smith era?
Because he had sex with a demon, although it turned out to be a lady, and he was dressed up on PCP and thought she was a demon, and so because he cheated on her, she broke up with Foggy.
Have I mentioned before that I kind of hate comics sometimes?
He also got disbarred.
Oh, of course. But then again, he's probably been disbarred half a dozen times by now.
Well, Daredevil just got disbarred, so he's moving to California to practice law now. Despite the fact that if you're just bad New York, you can't practice anywhere.
Right. That's not how the law works, guys. Reminds me of that issue where
it's law, Gerard. We don't have to explain it.
It reminds me of when they're like, all right, well, we're parading Alistair Smythe to get the death penalty here in New York State, where they don't have the death penalty. It's like, oh, oops.
Yeah.
But anyway, that has nothing to do with Spider-Girl, so why did I even bring that up?
Well,
you know, the drugs aren't going to mule themselves, James.
Be right back, DEA.
Absolutely. It's now probably a good time to wonder, have we set up email accounts for this yet, or what?
Let's see if I've got a Mayday Mondays account.
I can't remember if you had done that or not. I think you did.
Did I do that? If I did, I don't remember the password. They'll be mad at me. I am female. Should I do female or male? That'd be fine. If that's me, what gender I am.
Did you say, should I leave female? That's what it sounded like.
I'm going to put other. Well, it's...
Bye.
Alright, there we go.